Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to go over the basic anatomy of a project pitch. This will be useful for your final project in this class, but it will also be basically the same for any kind of hackathon, entrepreneurship competition, or innovation type of pitch because they're all very similar. They all last about 10 to 15 minutes and cover about 75% of your business plan in a very condensed form. So without further ado, I'm going to switch over to the PowerPoint presentation and give you a little bit of a run through of the main elements of a pitch. After that, I'm going to give an old pitch that I actually gave here at USC a few years ago to show you what an early stage competition pitch would really look like as compared with some of the more put together things that you might see on Shark Tank. As far as the rules for a project pitch go, there aren't really any major rules. It has to flow extremely efficiently. It has to cover all the major bases. And by that I mean you need to express what problem you're solving, for whom, why. You have to express why the current options or the current solutions to that problem are not sufficient. So what is your solution? Why is it better? You have to describe how you've developed your solution and how you're going to make that a reality. What is your plan to do that? You need a little bit of details. Not too much, but enough so that people know that you know what you're doing. And also you need to articulate how you're going to actually make money. It's not a charity competition. It is usually for business. So you need to show that you will actually make profit in this endeavor. And you have to tell people who you are. And if you have any partnerships or support from anyone else, bring that in too so that people know what resources you have and they know what resources you need. Generally speaking, the way to persuade people is the same as it's always been throughout history. People haven't changed since Aristotle. If you can cover ethos, pathos, and logos, you're good. You need to appeal to emotion. You need to use convincing logic. And you need to appear like you are a trustworthy authority figure. You have to be credible. If you've got those three elements in place, then you'll do pretty well. A little bit more specifically, though, for a 10 to 15 minute pitch, there's a general flow that you can use. And the order will change a little bit depending on how you like to tell stories. But generally speaking, you're going to start with a title slide that's going to have your value proposition on it and maybe a picture. People have to immediately, as you're walking up to the podium, see what you're all about. And then you're going to start with a verbal intro that's basically kind of an elevator pitch. You're maybe 30 seconds at most. But this is where instead of jumping straight into a bunch of slides, you give people a little bit of a story that hits home that value proposition and gives them a little bit more justification for what you stand for and why you're doing what you're doing. When you get into the slides, the early slides are going to be the main basics. Who are the people that you plan to help? What problem do you plan to solve? And what is the significance or impact or need that you're addressing? By about the middle stage, people should be really, really curious about how you're going to actually do this. They're going to know what you're doing, but now you need to get into a little bit more details. So in the middle section, a couple of slides, you're going to need to give them your big vision of your solution, followed by a solid map of how this thing that you want to build is actually built. They need to know that you're serious about this and that it's not a complete dream. If you have a demo or a prototype, it should go in the middle. Then you're going to need to express why your solution succeeds where the competition fails, and this is going to include a little bit of market analysis. Sometimes people put that before describing their product in detail. It really depends on what your product is. And whether the market analysis is better as motivation or something that you need to actually explain a little bit about first. After that, you need your revenue plan. This is where you say, we're going to make a business out of this and we're going to make profit. And so you need to show that you have a realistic view of how you're going to make whatever your idea is a reality. And the end of the presentation is going to oftentimes include some of the stuff that makes people want to support you as an entity. You're going to tell them who you are as a team, why you are an authority figure, why you're going to be able to drive this project home. You're also going to bring in, if you have any partners or support, bring in that element as well. Oftentimes people like to see that others support you. You're going to also have to have some kind of a timeline or plan of action that will be tuned to the specific competition. Sometimes it's, what will I do with the money you're going to give me immediately? Sometimes it's more of a trajectory over the next year or two. What will I do with my company? Sometimes you'll have to mention a couple of the things that you're not going to be expected to have done at that competition, but will have to think about soon. Things like intellectual property protection, things like that. So you'll have to put a little bit of a milestones or action plan into place at the end. And then finally the exit, where you thank the audience, let them know how to contact you, and try to get them to join your cause right now. And again, the order of these things can vary a little bit. It depends on how you want to tell your story. You just have to cover all of the important elements. So to show you kind of what this looks like at the low level of a university competition, where everything isn't all worked out and we don't have very good graphics and we don't have a very good prototype yet, I'm going to give you a presentation I gave a couple of years ago. We didn't have all of the bases covered as well as we could have. Things like revenue, cost, IP protection were less mature than they could have been, but it was good enough to win this particular competition. So the setting here is the Amazon Alexa Voice Prize Competition from 2019. So now, without further ado, I'll introduce me from a few years ago. Well, thank you, me from the future. I'd like to start with something that's really obvious. We're here talking today because verbal communication is the most common, fastest, and easiest way to interact with each other, and we'd like to extend that ease to our interactions with technology. But what if verbal communication were instead a source of struggle and anxiety? Imagine how that would impact your own career, your social life. It sounds bad because it is, and it's even worse for the millions of young children who struggle with these issues and may struggle with them for the rest of their lives. Clearly, this population is excluded from the luxury of connecting technology to human language, right? Well, actually, we believe the opposite. We believe that voice technology could actually be their greatest ally. And that's why we created Amplify, to supercharge pediatric speech therapy by delivering it at home in the form of interactive audio adventure games. Now, we need to narrow things down a little bit because nearly 1 in 12 of us have had some form of speech or language problem at some point in our lives. And so initially, we have to focus on the most severely affected. You've probably heard of autism. It's an incredibly common neurodevelopmental disorder affecting 1 in 54 children in the US, and nearly 2/3 of them need speech therapy. Cerebral palsy is the most common movement disorder in children, and nearly half need speech and voice therapy. Even if we exclude all other populations that might need speech therapy, that's over 1 million children in need in this country alone. And the good news is that speech therapy can help, especially if it's delivered early, but access to therapists and their time is often limited. And speech therapy requires hours and hours of repeated exercises, much more than you could ever do in a therapist's office anyways. And that's why the homework is so important. The therapy has to be done at home. The countless hours and the effort has to all be done by the child and their caregiver where it burdens them. And that's not ideal when the state of the art is glorified flashcards. It's boring. It's not fun. How do you get hours and hours of practice making the same repetitive noises using flashcards? Yet that's where this technology is at. Even if we take flashcards and we make them digital and put them on a tablet, it's still flashcards. And if you can't read and can't really push small buttons, this isn't very useful for you. Better technology exists. In fact, you can go get an Amazon Alexa right now and play a choose your own audio adventure game right now. The issue is that these games aren't designed for therapy. They don't analyze your voice in real time in a meaningful way for a therapeutic goal. They don't store the data so that you can track things over time. They don't allow you to personalize difficulty levels for a particular condition. So with Amplify, we're going to combine the best of both worlds. Our solution would look something like this. You'd have a Netflix-like repository of customizable audio adventure games that you download onto a local device like an Amazon Alexa. The child would then interact with the game played at home using the same vocal exercises that they would in a therapy session. And those recorded utterances will go up to a cloud for real-time analysis to control gameplay, and they'll be stored so that adherence can be tracked over time by a parent or even a therapist, and the voice qualities of interest can be analyzed in a more quantitative way than has been possible in the past. Now, imagine we had a little beta test of this at the Therapeutic Living Centers for the Blind the other day, and one of the exercises we recorded, just to give you an idea of what homework might sound like. Let's see if this sounds like what you think of as speech therapy.
In order to summon the spell, you must create a rising noise. It's your turn. Huzzah! The spell works!
Not standard of care, right? Well, it turns out that also our product is very scalable in this form. We can start with basic breath and sound control, but it doesn't stop there. The difficulty levels can be increased, new games downloaded that focus on syllables or linguistic categories, important words and phrases can be repeated. We can even go all the way to the level of emotion expression and recognition, exercises for social interaction, and all the way to general education. For our initial testing, we created a mobile demo experience. This was done by contracting a recent graduate to develop a game for us on the Unity game engine. That's a platform that can go from basic audio games all the way up to virtual reality. We also designed some modular game logic so that creating new characters or creating new scenarios is essentially a matter of drag and drop into a kind of plug and play system. And when we had that down, we were able to contract a group of a sound recording team that makes children's cartoons here in LA, and they made the audio clips like what you just heard. The guy on the right here is the somewhat British sounding guy. And then finally, we created a backend in Python that would allow us to store and analyze data using Amazon Web Services. End result, a happy kid. Actually, this was a beta tester with a traumatic brain injury who is operating at absolute full capacity to be able to not only pay attention to the game, but to sustain a vowel sound for 5 seconds. And he was absolutely enthralled by this. We hope we can extend this to more people. And it's also not just a complete pipe dream. We think that this is going to become a profitable business as well. Our hardware costs are basically negligible. We have none. It's a software company. So that means our costs are very low, and most of our costs are going to come from content development and marketing. It's also very high return. Even if we use that conservative number of 1 million potential people, and we cut that down even further by saying that the games that we have available will only hit a small portion, say 40% of that market, and then go down even further and say that of that, only 1% will ever hear about our product. That will still result in $1.2 million per year of revenue if we have a simple subscription model of $25 per month that the parents pay for directly. And we could actually charge more if we loop insurance into it. If we have more games and we can expand our content, we could reach 35% of the SOM, and that would result in tens of millions of dollars per year in revenue. We think we can make this work. I'm a physiologist, neuroscientist, and biomedical engineer, and I have a particular expertise in movement disorders and signal processing. My co-founder, Brian Cohn, is a computer scientist who is also an expert in business development and big data analytics. We have enthusiastic support from a variety of places, the Pediatric Therapy Network, therapeutic living centers from the Blind Children's Hospital, Los Angeles and Orange County. We have advisors who are pediatricians, business development experts, and med tech consultants, and we're in the Consortium for Technology and Innovation in Pediatrics, which is an FDA accelerator program for medical startups in pediatrics. Moving forward, we hope to, within just a few months, start our initial testing at PTN and possibly CHLA. With an iterative process, we plan to develop our content and really tune what we're delivering to the current clinical needs. Eventually, we'll start a clinical acceptability study, and when the results from that come in, we'll be able to seek new investment and business partnerships. At that point, we'll be able to go into clinical efficacy studies and, we hope, obtain FDA approval as a medical device. We'd be the only ones on the market that have FDA approval for a pediatric speech therapy device like this. And so with that, ultimately, with this runway that you can provide today with your support, we can amplify the voices of children in need. And if you'd like to support our mission, please contact us through our website or through this email. Thank you for your time. We'd now be happy to answer any questions. All right, so it's a little bit. All right, so it wasn't the best product pitch in the universe, and I don't remember exactly what I said from slide to slide, so I was kind of writing it down and reading it right there, so I might have paused a little bit more than usual, but that's the kind of thing you have to do. It sounds very political, it sounds very showy, like you're going to start taking off your glasses and crying and stuff like that. Yes, that's what you have to do. You need to get people on board with you. There's an art form to this. It's showmanship. But you also have to have a real plan, and you also have to make all of this make perfect sense to the Shark Tank crew. They're still going to be listening. They're still going to be looking for their key things that they want as far as whether your business is going to be viable. But if you have those and the emotional component, and you come off like you know what you're doing, you should do very well. And with that, so with the remaining 5 minutes or so, I'm going to quickly go through the evaluation rubric for the class projects. And I'll grade myself on the last presentation, so you get kind of an idea of the thought process that I'll go through when evaluating these presentations. So I'm going to turn myself off here and share the other screen. All right, so the first of the criteria is, does the project address an important problem or opportunity? So in this particular case, partly that's going to be what clinical condition is being addressed. So you could take that to mean, in my case, either a combination of autism and cerebral palsy, or at least people within that category who have communication problems and need speech therapy. That's a fairly large segment of the population, a fairly serious problem with real detrimental results if you don't treat it. So I would say that is an important problem, and I would probably give myself a 5 on that particular one. Does the project address a significant clinical or educational need? And I'm ignoring the 2 occupational therapy part, obviously, because it wasn't a OT project, but this number 2 is about an unmet need. And I think there is an unmet need in speech therapy right now. I would give myself a 4 or a 5 on that one. Marked down would only be because I did not, in that particular pitch, really emphasize some of the missing components in the standard of care right now. I basically just said there isn't enough therapy and left it at that, but I could have gone further and said things like homework is super critical, but it's on the honor system. There's no way to track adherence right now. There's a widespread feeling among speech therapists that there isn't enough time to accomplish their goals, or that their goals would be accomplished much more quickly if the number of sessions per week were increased, or the number of repetitions were increased over the course of a week. A lot of that was left more or less unsaid. And that actually to jump down a little bit, goes into number 4, which is evidence-based support. So I didn't provide in that pitch a great deal of citations or evidence that taking a product home and practicing speech therapy at home more would actually do anything as far as functional outcomes, because it's too early. I was proposing to maybe do efficacy studies later. So efficacy here for me would mean something more like it's effective, that people will actually take it home and use it, and that they will continue to use it, and that therapists will want to use it with their patients. And I didn't provide any evidence that that was true. So I would give myself a lower, like maybe a 2 or a 3 on evidence-based. I do think it was innovative though and unique. There isn't a whole lot else out there like it, so I would give myself the full credit on number 3. The product is, I think, useful and has potential to advance the field, so I would not take anything off for number 5 either. The presentation itself was prepared pretty well. I mean, this particular case, yeah, I'm reading off of notes I took 2 years ago and trying to recreate some of what I said. It obviously I'm going to be a little bit faster, more monotone, and stumble over some words here and there, but otherwise that was just that's not really relevant. That's going to be just how well you present that day. I give myself full credit for today, but some people could disagree probably. The business plan. There is a little bit of room to take off for the business plan, especially with respect to revenue. We didn't develop that extremely well, didn't cover intellectual property protection within the presentation because we couldn't. And the idea of a parent paying a $25 a month subscription wasn't really justified or supported. Even though we had support, it wasn't in the particular presentation. And I really fluffed over the potential insurance thing. Actually, that was a bad idea, and insurance probably wouldn't pay for a tool like this, at least not right now. So the business plan had, on the financial side, some things that weren't done extremely well. And the timeline was good conceptually, but I didn't have very many details. I didn't really include anything about costs at each step of the way. A lot of that may not be able to fit in your pitch. You just have to judge based on what you're doing, whether it's better to go general or go specific. I wouldn't take off too much for myself on the business plan, but there are some things I could have done better. So I might give myself a 3 or 4 out of 5 there. And I think that for the samples of work or the prototype, I had a pretty good description of what we had when we actually had a physical version of this as well to show people. But I wouldn't take off too much for that. For you, it's going to be different, of course, because you need to focus on technology learned in this class, and it would be good if you had some kind of a little bit of a demo. I think I would give myself a 4 or probably a 5 on this particular presentation if you converted it around to an OT project instead of an SLP thing. And as far as the presenter providing clear and insightful responses, nobody asked me questions because I'm sitting here alone. But if people had asked me questions, I will say I would have answered them great. So I think I would not have gone below a 40 for this. So I think I would be in the A range. I think it would be in the low A range and not in the high A range though, because there were some deficits in the business plan in how the revenue stream was described, and I didn't provide a whole lot of evidence-based support other than for some kind of obvious statements. I could have done a little bit better to drive that home. And I think that would be a similar standard that I would apply to you guys as well. But of course, we're going to be a bit flexible and see how things go. But that's kind of where my thinking is at the moment. And with that, I'll see you next week.